Okay, moving on to public hearing. Zone code amendments to prohibit outdoor cultivation of cannabis for personal use or prohibit commercial activity related to cannabis. We're ready.
Mayor, City Council members, Arnoldo Rodriguez, Development Services Department. The item before you this evening is a proposed amendment to the city's municipal code, specifically regulating the cultivation of marijuana and then also the commercial activities related to marijuana. Um, in a nutshell, the ordinance itself, it consolidates a lot of the city's existing regulations, which are currently housed in two different sections of the municipal code. And at the same time, it's also proposing new regulations pursuant to some of the Senate bills and Assembly bills that were recently adopted, which I'll go through very quickly. So it's simply for the benefit of both the council and community members to provide some context in terms of where the city's been, where the state's been, and in terms of where the existing regulations at the state level lie today. So going back to 1996, the city first passed the Compassionate Use Act, and what that did is it largely decriminalized the use of marijuana for medicinal purposes. A couple of years thereafter, the state approved the Medical Marijuana Program Act. However, at that time, the courts had indicated that at that time there was still local jurisdiction or local purview over how those regulations were going to be applied. So at the state level, they were permitted. However, it still granted local discretion in terms of if local jurisdictions would allow it or not allow it. Fast forward a couple of years later, the city took the very first action relative to marijuana, where the city prohibited medical marijuana dispensaries. That current regulation is still on the books today. So the city currently does not allow any dispensaries in terms of medical marijuana. Fast forward to 2013, the city adopted an ordinance which allowed some cultivation of medical marijuana at private residences, which therefore it was only for personal use, not necessarily commercial use. So no sale of marijuana. Fast forward again to 2015, the state of California approved the Medical Cannabis Regulation Safety Act, and that outlined some conditions for the sale, storage, transportation, and distribution and packaging of medical marijuana. Then fast forward about a year or so to Proposition 64. Proposition 64, commonly referred to as the Control, Regulating, and Tax Adult Use of Marijuana Act, applied to both medical and recreational marijuana. And one of the things that ordinance did is it stayed at the state level, said local jurisdictions, you now have to allow a minimum of 6 plants of cultivation for either recreational or for medicinal purposes. And local jurisdictions, you cannot regulate that. However, at the local level, you can regulate indoor versus outdoor cultivation. In response to that, the city adopted an interemergency ordinance in April of 2017 that stated that the city would allow indoor cultivation only, however, no outdoor cultivation. And again, this is only for personal or medicinal use at a private residence, again, for non-commercial activity. So again, the city did not allow the sale of marijuana. Fast forward a couple of months, actually about a month or so, in May of 2017, the city extended that urgency ordinance. That ordinance is set to sunset on June the 2nd of 2018. So if the city council were not to take action before that, and quite frankly, we have plenty of time, that ordinance itself would sunset, and then the city's regulations would fall back to the state of California, which would take effect January 1st of 2018. So today, our code again narrowly defines medical marijuana. We do not allow medical marijuana dispensaries. We only allow indoor cultivation for medical or for recreational use at a residence, and then our codes are silent in regards to everything else. And that brings us to today. So one of the challenges with that is pursuant to Senate Bill 94, which was approved in June of this year. So Senate Bill 94, what it did is it consolidated all of the regulations at the state level, including Proposition 64. So Senate Bill 94 is the latest set of regulations at the state level. and it simply consolidated all the previous actions, all the previous Senate bills or Assembly bills that were approved. And so one of the things that it did do is it retermed or recoined the term marijuana, so now it's commonly referred to as cannabis, and it also identified different regulations in terms of delivery, packaging, sales for both recreational or for medicinal purposes. So in terms of the ordinance itself, again, staff is proposing that we relocate existing regulations simply for indoor cultivation to a new section in the city's municipal code. There are absolutely no changes in terms of what the existing regulations are today when the interim urgency ordinance was adopted. So again, they're basically a mirror of the existing regulations, with the exception the term marijuana has been replaced with the term cannabis. So there's absolutely no modifications to that section of the ordinance. So simply to recap, the city has to allow the cultivation of marijuana up to 6 plants at any private residence. However, our code states it has to occur indoors, not outdoors. Pursuant to Senate Bill 94, we're permitted to do that. And in terms of new regulations, staff is proposing that the city prohibit all commercial cannabis activity. That includes commercial cultivation, the sale of any form of marijuana for either medicinal or for recreational purposes, the delivery of marijuana, the processing, manufacturing, or the testing of marijuana. So again, there would be absolutely no commercial activity permitted within the city limits. There is one exception, though, to that. And again, this is simply pursuant to Senate Bill 94. Pursuant to Senate Bill 94, the city has to have a pass-through clause, which allows licensed delivery services to pass through the city if they're going or if they're en route from one location or one community that does allow the delivery of marijuana to another community that allows the delivery of marijuana. So in other words, they simply have to have the ability to use the city's roadways. That does not imply or does not mean that they have the ability to stop and deliver marijuana within the city limits. So again, that's pursuant to Senate Bill 94. So with that being said, staff recommends that the City Council concur that the determination that the text amendment does not constitute a project pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act. And this evening we're introducing an ordinance again regulating all cannabis uses within the city, and we're requesting that the City Council this evening waive the first reading. That concludes staff's presentation.
Are there any questions and comments from the council at this time?
Through the mayor.
Yes, Buckland.
So one of the questions I have is, are we able to permit or issue permits so we know where grow sites are on indoor, and those regulations for indoor grows are the same as what we've already had on the books to include filtered systems and everything else? Am I correct?
Correct.
So they would still have to obtain a permit to grow at specific sites?
Yes, correct. So any person that's going to cultivate at a residence indoors still has to register with the city, and it still has to be ventilated. And there's also a maximum of 6 plants.
And then on the state level, this is all of the cannabis activity on a commercial basis is totally a cash based system. Am I correct?
Correct.
The banking institutions, because of federal law, don't allow them to accept funds through normal banking or regulated banking institutions.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Any other?
Yeah, through the mayor. Arnaldo, this is going to be on the outside. We have zero tolerance, as you said. Had a few folks call me and stuff like that. What happens when when you receive a phone call? People are growing outside. What's your proper protocol? What do you do?
So the proper protocol is that goes to the top of the stack of code complaints, and we immediately go out to those sites. We try to establish contact with the tenant of the property. The vast majority of the times we are successful. For some reason, if we're not successful, then we do is we send a certified letter to the property owner. And then at that point, and once we establish contact, we ask them to eradicate the marijuana on site. So to date, I can't give you the precise number of how many we've done this year. I'm going to say probably over half a dozen. And then we ask them, to date, I will say that we've gotten 100% voluntary compliance by the alleged perpetrators or the growers.
And how much time do you give them once you receive the complaint, you go out there? How much time do you give them to clean up?
We've given people up to 5 or 6 days. It's challenging at times. Sometimes it takes us a day or two to establish contact. So from the initial contact, sometimes it could take a couple of days. However, we've also done it within 24 hours.
And I'll have another one for you. We have zero tolerance, outdoor growth, zero.
Correct.
So is there any way that we could throw something in there? If once we show up, we take it, and then we give them a little fine on top of that for our services to, pay for our manpower in order to do this? Is there any way that this could be thrown in there somehow? We pick it up, we do it immediately, because zero means zero, and there's I've been receiving a lot of concerns, and it's growing season is going right now, and you can smell it throughout the community in certain areas, and I just want to throw it out there. Is there any way when we show up we can confiscate it on the spot and throw a little fine in there on top of that for our time?
We could fine them up to $250 per incident. Unfortunately, we cannot go on the property immediately to confiscate it. Rather, we would have to go through the court system, and we would have to obtain a warrant to physically go on the property. However, we can fine them up to $250 per day.
Per day.
Correct.
Okay. Oh, that took care of that. Thank you, Arnoldo.
Okay, that triggered another one for Councilman Buckland.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Rodriguez, the state of California currently has gone through a number of iterations of, I guess, guidelines.
Correct.
From, I believe it's 3 regulatory agencies that are looking at the cannabis, the commercial cannabis side of things. Do you know when the state of California is going to finalize what those rules and regulations will be? Any idea?
So my understanding is that it's going to be January 1st of 2018. So any local jurisdiction that does not have established rules on the books, it would fall under the purview of the state. I spoke with the state earlier today, and they indicated that that's their goal, that it's January 1st, 2018. And I was also on their website, and that also implies January 1st, 2018.
So once again, state bureaucracy moving at an extremely fast pace to be able to help us with land use regulations and other things within the state. So thank you. That's the only other question I'd had at this time.
We must agree with you on that statement. Tongue in cheek, yeah, I get it. Thank you very much. With that, there's no more questions or comments at this time. I'd like to open the public hearing for the zoning code amendments to prohibit outdoor cultivation of cannabis for the personal use and prohibit commercial activity related to cannabis is now open. If there are any members of the public who would like to address the council on this issue, please step up to the podium, state your name for the record. If there's anybody that would like to do that. Seeing no comment on this issue, I'm going to close the public hearing, bring it back to the council for possible action.
Through the mayor.
Yes.
Move staff's recommendation to concur with the determination that the tax amendment does not constitute a project pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, Section 15061, subsection B, Section 3, and also introduce the attached cannabis uses ordinance and waive the first reading.
We got a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous action. Thank you.